Thanks, Aaron, and thanks to Oracle for the invite to come up here today, as well as to all of you for actually coming to learn a little bit more about the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace, or NSTIC. As Aaron mentioned, I'm Jeremy Grant. I joined NIST, I guess about 18 months ago to lead implementation of the NSTIC, and I'll be explaining today a little bit about what the program entails, some of the steps we've taken, and also detail ways that you all can get involved. Starting off with just sort of a high-level slide. If you don't mind, I'm going to move this so I can actually see what I'm talking about without staring at the screen. Can you still hear me now, like this? Or did I just lose the... all right. I'll look at the screen and deal with the setup. 4 years from now, what if 80% of your customers were already arriving at your website, holding a secure credential for identification and authentication, and you were able to trust this credential in lieu of your existing username and password systems that you're using today? Envision a world where the solution would be interoperable with the login systems you have, meaning you don't have to issue new credentials. Would support multi-factor authentication that could get you out of password management and improve security significantly. The credentials would be tied to a robust identity proofing mechanism, meaning that you would know if people actually are who they claim to be, and there would be baked-in rules to limit liability and protect privacy within this environment. What would this mean for security and loss prevention and for reducing friction in online business? Well, on the security and loss side, there's a great study that comes out every year from the Secret Service that they do in partnership with Verizon on data breaches. Last year, 5 of the top 6 vectors of attack and data breaches were tied to exploiting the different weaknesses of passwords. With that, the number of Americans that were impacted by data breaches rose 67% from 2010 to 2011. And we continue to see weak identity systems fueling online fraud, making it impossible to know who the proverbial dogs on the internet are. And in terms of actually reducing friction in doing online commerce, today's studies show 75% of customers will go do anything that they can to avoid creating yet another new account on a website. 54% of people will leave a website or not bother to return when they're prompted to, which leads to abandoned shopping carts. And 45% of consumers will abandon a site rather than attempt to reset their passwords or answer the security questions that they've set up for themselves. I was citing this for a few months, and then my wife, about 4 months ago, proved this to me. She came up to me one night as I was doing some work after dinner on the computer and handed me a list of 5 things and said, "Darling, will you buy these on Amazon?" And I looked at her and said, "Honey, why don't you buy them on Amazon?" And she said, "Well, I forgot my password and I just don't want to go through all the crap involved with getting it reset, so please be a dear, and then for the sake of the marriage, as well as to have a good story when I actually make this point in conferences, decided to follow through and get her what she needed." Trust is something that matters more and more to online business. There's 3 numbers on the screen: 2 trillion, 2.5 trillion, and 1.5 trillion. The World Economic Forum has done some great work in this space, looking at not just security and identity, but the broader issue of trust and data, and how, as the internet as we know it changes and the types of transactions we're engaged in change each year, along with the type of data that we actually leave behind, in as many cases aggregated and then bought, sold, and traded, the issue of trust is something that really matters quite a bit. $2 trillion, according to the World Economics Forum study from earlier this year, is the total projected value of online retail sales across the G20 nations in 2016. It's a lot of money. $2.5 trillion is what they forecast this number can grow to if consumers can be convinced that the internet is more worthy of their trust than it is today. Likewise, that number shrinks to $1.5 trillion if people feel that trust is eroded. And the study, and I do recommend that people actually read it, points out a bunch of reasons, including a lot of concerns about security and privacy, and just a fundamental distrust over what different organizations are going to do with your data once it's out there, that is leading people to trust the internet less and less this year. We're with the Department of Commerce. Clearly, we want to encourage commerce. We want that $2.5 trillion number to be what we see in a few years, not $1.5 trillion. NSTIC is a key initiative that's actually focused on trying to ensure those numbers are higher and not lower. So we've talked a lot about imagining what could actually enable this. An identity ecosystem is a concept I want to introduce today. It's defined as it's really something we think can be a foundation of online, enhanced online trust, reduce fraud, and better customer experiences. We've got a voluntary public-private partnership that's come together these last few months to help create it. Voluntary models don't succeed unless people volunteer. One of the reasons I'm here today is to make the pitch to each of you to spend some time getting involved. The vision of NSTIC is that by January 1st, 2016, we'll have a vibrant identity ecosystem where all individuals in this country and others can choose from among multiple identity providers and different types of digital credentials for more convenient, secure, and privacy-enhancing transactions every place that they go online. So what is NSTIC? Well, One, it's a catchy acronym, one of the better ones in town these days, in my view at least. The National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace was released in April of last year, but it actually dates back to 2009. Shortly after President Obama took office, his administration conducted a comprehensive cyberspace policy review. And out of that, 10 near-term action items emerged, one of which was calling for the creation of a cybersecurity-focused identity management vision and strategy, looking not only at the intersection between cybersecurity and identity management, which I think most folks in this room understand quite concretely, but also called out right at the beginning that it needed to be a strategy that also looked at privacy and civil liberties interests and would specifically look for ways to leverage privacy-enhancing technologies for the nation. Based out of that report, there was a large effort led by the White House that culminated in the release of the NSTIC in April of 2011 at an event hosted at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which at the end of the day called for an identity ecosystem. I referenced the term earlier, an online environment where individuals and organizations can better trust each other because they're following agreed-upon standards and policies to obtain and authenticate their digital identities. And there's 4 guiding principles that are pervasive throughout the NSTIC, which is that the solutions that emerge in this ecosystem, and I want to make the point up front, NSTIC is a strategy. It's an aspirational document. It lays out what we want the world to look like in a few years and prescribes a specific path of collaborating with other stakeholders in public and private sector entities to get there. But it does state, while it's a strategy, that these solutions that emerge need to follow 4 principles, which is that they're privacy-enhancing and voluntary, which is that they're secure and resilient. The solutions have to be interoperable with one another, and they have to be cost-effective and easy to use.